Hello, everyone. Thank you for sliding into our DMs today. My name is Dan Pizzetta,
Hi, and my name is Montana.
and welcome to sliding into the DMs of Disability. This is episode 5. We had a little bit of a gap, but everything is going very well. We're so excited to be able to be back with you. Today's topic, we are going to be talking about our rare disease experience that we had last month, from chronicling our journey to getting there to all of the events that we went to and some key takeaways that we had. So before we dive into that, I wanted to pass it along to Montana. As I said before, we had a little bit of a gap, and Montana wanted to talk about that for a little bit, so I'll pass it on to her first.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for passing it on. And thank you all for being so patient while we've been waiting to come back from this small break. We did not anticipate us to have a break at all. However, on my side of things, there were a few families' deaths as well as living situations that got a little bit murky. All right now is doing a lot better than it was before, but I just wanted to address this a little bit more because I want to make sure everyone knows that it is okay to take time for yourself and take a break if needed to get everything situated and make sure you are on the right path of healing. Because I know myself, I'm still healing through everything that's happened the past few weeks, and it'll be a continuous journey. But it's okay to recognize what feelings you're having and what you need at that time. If it is to spend time with your family, loved ones, or if it's just taking a lot of naps and trying to recover with having a chronic illness as well. I did all three and a lot more on this difficult journey in the past few weeks. And I appreciate you guys hanging on for the ride. And hopefully, no more unexpected breaks will happen. But if they do, I'll definitely do the exact same thing here and say thank you. And we appreciate you. And we're super excited to talk about this episode more.
Yes, self-love is the best love, and I'm really glad on your for you that everything is starting to stabilize, and that it's important for our viewers to know as well. Like, we're all trying to manage our own chronic illnesses and balancing our spoons and have our own crazy life situations, and sometimes it's good to take those breaks.
Yes, 100%. Breaks are absolutely necessary. And sometimes life happens when you don't have those breaks already scheduled. So you have to self reflect and figure out, okay, what's best for me at this time and why. I know a lot of us feel imposter syndrome and like the guilt for taking care of ourselves. But there were a few times, especially with unexpected deaths in like my family, of being like, okay, this is a lot for any normal human to deal with. And it's okay to just say, hey, I need a day or two off to sort through my feelings and figure out what's best for me and my family moving forward with this new life and this new change that we all encountered. And I think it's important to note that because I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about it. Everyone's like, oh, like, do what's best for you. But then when you actually state, hey, this is how you can support me and this is how I need you to show up, a lot of the times things fall through the cracks. And that's why it's so important to advocate for yourselves, but also with advocating for yourselves, it's also important to know that you can get burnt out from always advocating. And it's okay to take a little bit of time to take a reset and figure out what's best for you moving forward.
Exactly. I think that is the perfect way to put it, and I couldn't have said it any better in any capacity. So with that, I think we can move on to our topic of Rare Disease Week. So for those of you who do not know what Rare Disease Week is, it is the Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill is an event that happens in DC every year on around February 28th, which is 29th this year, thankfully for a leap year, Rare Disease Day. And that is where hundreds of rare disease advocates from all over the country, the United States, come together, and we are able to learn about policy, being able to network with each other, being able to share our stories with representatives and senators, and being able to advocate for legislation that is so important to the rare disease community, all of which happens over the course of many different days. So it's such a beautiful and incredible experience. I had the pleasure of doing it. This was my 5th year, my 3rd year in person. There were 2 years that it was done via Zoom due to COVID. But the in-person ones are always so special and such an incredible experience. And Montana, this was your first time ever. So I guess going into it,
Yes.
what were your um things that you were very excited for, as well as things that you may have been nervous going into it pre arrival?
Yeah, 100%. So yes, it was definitely like my first year. And so, well, I would say I was nervous first and foremost because it was a new experience. And I was like, oh, not really knowing like what to expect and like how to plan for it and like what to do. But thankfully, I have amazing people like Dan and other advocates that I could lean on for support and just be like, hey, this is what's going on. What would you recommend? Where should I go like moving forward? So there was that part of like being nervous, but I was also super, super excited because I'm not around many rare disease advocates. I'm, of course, around Dan, but we are in different states. And so I've never really talked to many people who were in my state. And I learned so many amazing things with my North Carolina group. And it was just amazing to hear their stories, hear how they've been advocating, and overall, like how strong and powerful these men, women, and everyone in between, even teenagers, a few people in like my group with North Carolina. One person was, I believe, a senior in high school. And he was not even sure if he was going to speak, and then he spoke, and I'm like, oh my god! It was like a proud moment for all of us in North Carolina. We're like, yes, kill it. So I think it was really amazing to see everyone like rally around and support one another, even though we come from different walks of life, but we all have that one common theme, which is being rare and supporting people with rare. And I was super excited to have that space because I have not really had many rare disease friends per se. And the ones I did, they were states away, hour differences, or even countries away. I've had a few people who had similar eye diseases in Europe. And so I was super excited to meet with people and learn more about them, but also learn about their journey and how they have stand up for themselves, but also people like them. Because I think it can sometimes be very isolating and lonely having a rare disease if you're, I think, someone kind of like me, having a full able bodied family, as well as having like able bodied partner and their family and like stuff like that. So I think it's really nice having that community support. And that's why I was like super stoked about, as well as learning from everyone with getting ready for going on Capitol Hill, but also just diving into all the research. I'm kind of a research buff. So I nerd out a little bit with that.
Yeah, I have to echo so much of your sentiment in terms of just the beauty of this weekend, where if there I think there was like 800 of us, if I remember correctly, in terms of the attendance. And I
Yeah, like
guarantee you there's probably over 500 different rare diseases. And I think that's the beauty of like all our little communities on their own would not have this voice, but all of us together as a rare disease community are able to make such a large and tremendous impact on
mhm.
legislation and advocacy. And all of us, because there's so many different rare diseases, have such unique journeys, but also very similar journeys. We've all experienced uh different pains, but we've all experienced
Mhm.
pain. We all experience different forms of isolation or financial burden, but we all have
Yeah.
faced the similar concept of it. Um and it's beautiful that even though we have gone through this and have had all of these experiences, we're all able to come together and really shed light on these perspectives that should never be forgotten. And being able to highlight so many different aspects of um how rare disease impacts everyone in all different ways. And I think that's something that especially on that Friday, the first day, or not the Friday, yeah, no, Monday. I'm forgetting the days. Oh my God. The first day that we were there.
Yeah, it
Uh
was a month ago, so that,
yeah.
yeah,
I
valid.
should have pulled up a calendar, but I literally, as we were talking about self-love, I have just woke up from like a 2 hour nap after work. Uh so the first day that we were there, as Montana had alluded to prior, we're in two different states. I am from New Jersey, and Montana is from North Carolina. I had decided to drive to DC, so that way we would have a car, so that way we can travel back and forth from our hotel, and just be able to transport. So I had driven up earlier in the day, and was waiting for Montana, and Montana had decided to take a train, and I I will share my perspective. I've never taken a train in the United States,
Me either.
multi-states away.
Yeah.
I never had the perspective of it. I just assumed it was kind of like a subway in the sense of like it was very on clock. But we
Hmm.
one of the great things that disability gives us is to expect the unexpected and always being able to pivot and evolve.
Yeah.
So I'll share I'll pass it to Montana and let her talk about her train ride and how we had to make adjustments.
Oh my goodness, yes. Okay, so this was the first time I've ever done a train ride. I was super excited for it. It was either doing a train ride or driving. And for those who know me, I do not like driving. It's multiple reasons, but one reason lately is with my eye disease. I've been having some discomfort with like my vision and stuff, so it's just not comfy. I can still like legally see and drive, thankfully. But sometimes my eyes just don't want to drive for long periods of time because they get tired. But long story short, I decided to do a train ride, because everyone I've heard say, "Oh, it's amazing! You can work from the train. You can like prep," which that is true. I was in business class. The Wi-Fi was okay. With me with my job, we have like a lot of like data stuff, so it takes up a lot of gigabytes. So I think it would work fine for normal person like to work, but with me doing a lot more than just emails and like messages, it takes a lot to function. But it was super cool. But it kept getting delayed. Like Dan was saying, we had to make different adjustments. And it's like, okay, great, we're on time, like halfway through. Then all of a sudden there was railroad issues. And then they're like, oh wait, we have to take emergency stop 2 hours before we were in DC because there was tech like technical difficulties, which I'm like, should I be worried or will we be fine? Like, can I just duck and roll? Everything ended up fine, but I believe my train, how late was it, Dan? Like an hour and 15, 40
Is yeah,
minutes
at
late?
least an hour and a half, I feel.
Yeah, it was at least an hour for sure. And I'm like, oh my goodness, which I knew we had like some time, like wiggle room. So I was like, okay, cool. My train gets in, I think it was like 4:15. So I'm like, okay, the thing didn't start till like 5:30. So I'm like, okay, we have time. And then I got there like at 5:30 or something. And then we were running through the train station trying to find the Uber so we could go to this event on Sunday. Thankfully, I emailed someone saying, "Hey, like we're coming. Like my train just got in late. Just want to let you know." Because I always love respecting other people's time and like I don't want them to be like, "Oh my goodness, like these people are late." Because I really wanted to see this movie and have this experience, but it was just not like we planned it. One thing, cool thing about the train ride was on both trains going there and going from. I've met really cool people. One person with the first ride up, he actually bought like my lunch, and we like talked about like his life, and then we talked about advocacy, and then his son is going to be in politics for college, and he would like to be a mayor one day. So we just talked about advocacy, and I thought that was so cool. Which was super nice because I've never had someone like buy my lunch that I was not that close with. I'm like, oh my God, this is kindness. More people need to have that in the world. But also, I found it very unique and interesting because we became friends through a train ride, but also through us talking about advocacy and talking about what I'm doing as well as what his son hopes to do. and what has worked well for him in the past, because he was also like a veteran. So it was really cool hearing different perspectives and learning from him, because he was probably like my parents' age, a little bit older. So I thought that was very interesting, like theme ride of like the train.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an amazing experience that you had on the train. And I guess one benefit or bright side of the delay.
Hmm.
I remember the two things that I'll always remember, the relief that I thought the event started at 6, so I was getting very, very worried. Um,
Yeah,
and once I found out it was 6:30, I was like, okay, good. We have some wiggle room.
a little bit of
We even
time.
have time to get to my car because I parked it in a parking garage a little bit
Oh,
away.
yeah.
So with the Uber, I'm like, I called it right when like your train stopped, and then they weren't letting you off for a little bit. So I'm like, I'm
Yep.
trying to like get this Uber, be like, just wait like 5 minutes, please. Just like we'll be out there, I promise. And the guy, thankfully to his credit, stayed. And we
Oh,
got in there. We missed
amazing.
like the appetizer like mingle time, but we got in. We sat by a close friend of mine in the advocacy part. Her name is Caroline. She's a wonderful human. And we got to see this documentary called Bombardier Blood, which was an incredible look into it focused specifically on the disability hemophilia. Um and it focused on the disparities between it around the world, and this one person's passion of mountain climbing and
Mhm.
their way of bringing hemophilia awareness through that by climbing all 7 of the major summits around the world. I my primary takeaway from it was this idea of it's not just the United States that goes. I think a lot of us in the United States look at rare disease as just an issue here. And while it definitely is,
Mhm.
comparatively around the world, we have done a lot to protect those with rare diseases. And we are very privileged to be where we are in the United States. And when we look at countries, one of the countries that specifically focused on was Nepal, where Mount Everest is, and just seeing the disparity that some of the people around the world go through. One of the most poignant moments was very early on in the beginning when they met this family that all has hemophilia, and like they had to carry their family like 30-40 minutes to get to a car to get to a hospital when there was a medical
Mhm.
emergency. And it really stuck with me in terms of just realizing that what we're doing here is really important.
Mhm.
But we are also in a spot that's very privileged comparatively to the rest of the world. What do you think your big takeaway was?
Yeah, 100%. One thing that I did learn throughout the few days that I was at the event was I'm very fortunate. My eye doctor that I have is a specialist in my eye disease, and I think there's only like 158 to like 200 in the US like alone. And for me, it was 20 minutes away from my primary like house, like where I grew up. So it was very easy for like my family to take me because we had a car. And like Dan was saying, seeing all these other countries and realizing like, wow, we all are affected by a rare disease, but we have different levels. So I think it definitely humbled me and made me more aggressive, I guess, when it comes to advocating, because it's not someone like myself in the United States. It could be someone in Nepal with the same thing I'm going through, or someone in a different country that they don't have the research or they don't have all this resources to help. So that definitely was very eye-opening. I do remember in this movie I cried like a lot, I think. I know it was definitely a few times, especially when it talks about the children, especially the ones with hemophilia. And you can just see the comparison of what it's like to have hemophilia if you're in America and what's like if you're not in America and you don't have that access. It's completely different with how severe their symptoms are and what they have to do. And it's very like eye-opening of like, wow, it takes you aback and has like a different perspective of, okay, yeah, like this sucks. Like we have a rare disease. And I feel like sometimes I know myself, I do it sometimes. If I have like a really like rough day or I'm not really sure what's going on with my flare, sometimes I think, oh, poor me a little bit. But in this, you don't think that. You think, wow, how can I improve not only people with my disease, but anyone with a rare disease like hemophilia, like anything to make sure our voices matter so this does not happen to other people because everyone should have access to healthcare and have access to treatment no matter what your status is. And sadly, even in America, that's not the case, which I can go on a whole other rant about, aka like being on insurance due to having to work like 40 hours a week. But sometimes that doesn't work if you have a chronic illness. But I think there's a lot of improvements that we can do moving forward. And I'm so thankful that they created this movie. It was so beautiful and overall uplifting. There's definitely some sad moments where I cried. I was like, oh my God. But I think that's what happens when you watch a really great movie, you know? But it definitely moves me to tears as well as moved me for wanting this action to continue and help like other people. I also realized I don't think I want to climb Mount Everest. It's too cold.
That is a great takeaway to have. I am I'm that reason for heights. I think it's too tall. Um,
Okay. Like roller coasters, like we've talked about.
oh my God, yeah, no, pretty much.
Mhm.
And I think that's though the point that you bring up, especially like even in the United States, like geography and where you're born matters so
Mhm.
much about your health outcome. And
Yeah.
for me being born, I was born in New Jersey with my heart condition. And if I wasn't born so close to Philadelphia, which is one of the top cardiologist areas, I don't know if I
Mhm.
live like once I my issues start arising when I'm born. I or even if I do, the amount of cost to travel, like say I was born in like Nebraska to go to Philadelphia, that's just it would be
Yeah.
such a tremendous cost on my family. I remember one time during I was having lunch on the day that we were advocating, and
Mhm.
I was talking to this one woman from Idaho, and she has to take her kid every 3 months from where they live in Idaho to Chicago to see a specialist. And it costs so much money, and they have to fight to get approval every time. And it's just like, I can't,
Oh.
it's just crazy because even that can be seen as a privileged aspect,
Mhm.
especially compared to other parts of the rest of the world. And like, yeah, like you said in the movie, like there's, or about the movie, it's just, there's so many moments that made me very emotional, that
Mhm.
made me, really reflect on my life, and makes me want to continue not only being a stronger advocate for us here but for everyone. And I think that was especially even more poignant because that there was a panel afterward and we got to hear so many different questions and hear from the people who made this documentary, both the stars and the producers. And it was really touching to be able to experience or to hear their voices post documentary and just talking about all these different disparities and how we can continue making that change every single day, even though it feels like
Yeah.
we it can feel very easy in the world of advocacy to feel like we're not making that impact. But we are.
Yeah. One thing that I did really like how they stated in the movie was HIV and AIDS. I believe it was the 80s or 90s that they reflected because hemophilia is like a rare blood disease, so you have to do like transfusions. But I Dan, correct me if I'm wrong because it's been like a month and a lot has been happening in my life. But in like the 80s and 90s, someone's blood got contaminated with everyone else's blood, and then that contracted HIV, and then they basically gave HIV to um, patients like unexpectedly due to how like the blood was sorted out. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
And I remember that I remember post documentary, the producer and the stars were saying like that part needs to be put in to
Yeah.
share a part of the hemophilia story, and they had to fight for that to be put in. And a lot of people were thankful that it was, because it's that idea of, yeah, like this was a darker moment for not only people who had HIV AIDS, but
Hmm.
a different disability, hemophilia, because they require blood transfusions. And if there were blood transfusions where people had HIV AIDS in their blood, it got transmitted to people who had never had it prior. And it
Yeah.
caused a lot of discrimination about their disability. It ruined a lot of their health outcomes, and it's an incredibly tragic part of their that disability's history. But now they have, it's been 40 years, and how is this disability viewed now? Is
Hmm.
this still an issue everywhere around the world? And like talking about all of that was really important as well.
Yeah, I remember that hit me home like really quick because I have a really good friend. Her sister has HIV. She was born in a different country, Africa, and she was adopted and moved to like the US when she was in middle school. Her sister was supposed to have the same. However, due to her having HIV, it was really hard for her to get into um, like foster care and get into the adoption process because they were not very well knowledged on how she contracted HIV. It was due to her mom. Her mom was like giving birth and she was about to die from giving birth, and they had to do a blood transfusions. But at this time, most people give birth in villages. They don't give birth in hospitals because to them it was not comfortable. So she had a very hard pregnancy and a very hard delivery. So they had to go get like the doctor to get a blood infusion, but it I guess was not clean or something like the needle, and that's how the mom contracted it. And before she gave birth, the baby had it, or they had to give like the baby a blood transfusion. And I could never imagine like having that per se, but from hearing my friend's perspective of this being her own sister, and then also her mom having it later on in life, and her being the healthy one, she had to do more of like the housework, and she just had like more energy and stuff. And I did not realize because I was very young at this time when she told me about her sister, um, how many side effects and health issues you can have from having just one chronic condition and moving forward. And I keep learning more and more. So when they talked about in the movie, it really hit home to me of being like, wow, people still have a stigma to this. Because this was 10 years ago when I was in middle school, she told me. So 10 years ago, in a different country, people still had the stigma on HIV and AIDS. So I was very thankful that they put that in the story because, yes, it's very important for hemophilia and what happened, but also in general for anyone who has hemophilia, but also has HIV and AIDS. Because most of the time, it is because of a healthcare crisis or they were desperate to save this person's life. And this is how you like contracted it and such.
Yeah. And I think that perfectly summed up that idea of just how a lot of us in disability are interconnected.
Yeah.
And just how much as a community we rely on each other, even if though it may not seem that way. Um, and that is a really good segue into our Monday. So I did remember the days. I was so that was Sunday night, and now we're going
Yeah.
into the Monday, where we will talk about, I think we'll definitely be able to dive into it a little bit here. So our journey to on Monday took us to the Ronald Reagan Building of International
Mhm.
Trade. Uh Surprisingly, we had a hotel just outside of DC. It was in College Park, Maryland. And 18 miles you would assume would not take an hour and a half. Or not, yeah, but for us it
Yeah.
did. And we arrived just in time for the beginning. Um, but it was an incredible so that day, we arrived just in time, got to Ronald Reagan building, and throughout that day it was very focused on sharing and informing about information concerning the legislation that we're going to talk about, the state of rare disease throughout the United States. Had a lot of educational breakout rooms, a lot of strategizing, the whole shebang. So I think the best part to start for the last 7 minutes that we're here is talking about um in the keynote. We had a great friend of mine, Abby Hauser, and I believe you got to know them during your time at Rare Disease Week. They had done the keynote uh talking about their journey and how she was able to uh grow as the scared child of having a rare disease to being the amazing advocate that she is today. And I think for all of us that grew up with a rare disease or had gotten it in our young adulthood, really stuck with us because it can have that feeling of just being lost in this world. And now being in this position that we have found our place, and that place, and it could always be evolving in terms of what our place exactly is, but we feel
Mhm.
confident going into any journey. And I think that was something that um really resonated with me throughout that keynote.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like for me, it was definitely like owning like who we are, and as well as just owning our voice. I feel for me personally, it was hard for me to accept my rare disease as well as like my other chronic disease because of society and how people view it if you're disabled. And it's taken a lot of reflection and inner work to realize this is a part of me, and this is not a part of me I have to be ashamed of. This is a part of me that has gone through a lot of ups and downs, but that's okay. Like, we are human. But what am I going to do moving forward? Like Abby stated in the keynote, like, I was a scared child, but now here I am advocating for others like that, but also moving forward. And I feel like that keynote spoke to my inner child a little bit, like before I was even diagnosed with my rare eye disease. But my inner child, when I was diagnosed with speech issues and had to do speech therapy for 10, 11 years, and then all these different stages of my inner child with who I am now and being okay with finally having my voice, but also realizing there's some people that are not there yet, and that's okay. I will talk about my story for myself, but also for others who are not there yet. Because I was like that. It took me a few years to finally be okay with owning it and opening up, like, this is a part of me.
That's something that every person has their own unique diagnostic odyssey and how they process it, how they handle it both physically and emotionally. It's such a beautiful perspective to realize that at the I think the grand lesson is that while all of us, some of us may be able to process it quicker or adjust quicker, it doesn't invalidate your journey, and that it's just as important for you to go through all of these things, and you will become a better, not only a better person, but you'll also become the person that you wanted to be, not in spite of your condition, but because of your condition.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think
1000%.
exactly. And I think this is a beautiful way to end this part of the episode. For our next part, we will be discussing the rest of our Monday, as well as the Tuesday, which is when we advocated and met with legislators and yeah, marched on Capitol Hill. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for listening. We love any and all feedback. Please don't forget to forget to subscribe. There'll be a link to our disability written Instagram, as well as a link to our the Patreon. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you all. Talk to you later.
Bye.